Welcome to the Conversation Lab. I'm Don Schaefer. If democracy begins in conversation, then we need to nurture a culture where ordinary people like us routinely talk about those things that help us understand each other, whether it's about climate, race, religion, gender, or politics. When we're trying to make sense of our city and the world we live in, every question comes with a set of assumptions about the nature of ourselves and our place in a larger world. The Conversation Lab provides a safe place to talk about some of those things. This program is produced by CFRO-FM in Vancouver. It's available on air and online on various platforms, and we appreciate the help of Vancouver's community groups. Welcome to the Conversation Lab. My name is Don Schaefer, and today we're speaking with Vancouver City Councilor Michael Weib and multidisciplinary artist, musician, and facilitator, and a good friend, Tonye Aganaba, and Green Party candidate and activist, Kelly Tatham. At the beginning of the new year, Michael Weib organized a roundtable discussion on Zoom to discuss the root causes of violence, poverty, criminalization, and the future of community care. Tonye facilitated this discussion. Kelly helped put it together with members of our community and over 200 guests. Some of the topics included decriminalizing poverty and poverty reduction plans, a sex workers' safety plan, the many issues concerning missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, an equity framework and intersectionality toolkit, the Mayor's Overdose Emergency Task Force, Women's Equity Strategy, and the Healthy City Strategy.
Don, thanks for inviting us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to have you both with us. You're two of my favorite people, and I love the work that you do. And I was blown away by the roundtable. I guess my first question, Michael, is how did this event come about?
It came about because I struggled through the budget process trying to figure out how to best deal with some of the funding issues we had and how we were going to pivot some of the funding from the police budget and spend it in ways that were going to improve community safety and well-being. And I've struggled with the idea that we kept pitting police versus community services, and that there wasn't a plan in place to deal with that. So we were sitting in meeting after meeting, days after days, hearing hundreds of speakers during the year on decriminalizing poverty. We listened to tons of speakers on feeling unsafe. We voted on the safe injection site in Yaletown, and we listened to days and days of speakers on that. So it was difficult because I felt a lot of the people in Vancouver want the same thing. They want to feel safe in their neighborhood. They want to feel compassionate for their neighbors. They want to support where they can. And I think the city, like other departments, hasn't found a way to bring that conversation and have that proper dialogue. And I think that Kelly, who's just joined us here, has been instrumental in also kind of making sure that I'm recognizing that conversation is a conversation that's ongoing. It's difficult. It's one that everyone's having around every dinner table, and COVID's made worse. And so how the event came about is I've done a few time to talks, some on watershed, some on public art. I had a great one on False Creek. And this one was one I felt that was needed for me to get a better perspective because the dialogue was so divisive on public safety. And who better to bring in than someone that countered some of my thoughts and some of my views, but also really understood where I wanted to go and the understanding of public safety and how we want to make a safer city. So that's where Kelly reached out to Tonye and was able to get an amazing facilitator that was able to host a dialogue, which was, I think, really needed and is just one of many. We're going to have more dialogues on this. I think some of the conversations that came out about what is a community policing office and how do they support community, and the idea that they challenge the viewers and the people that were listening on that meeting to, if they want to see better public safety, come volunteer for them, walk the back street, see what's happening in their neighborhoods, I thought was a really instrumental piece to that meeting. I really appreciate, because people do need to be challenged and get out of what they feel is their safety bubble and get to see what's happening in the city.
From 30,000 feet, it seems like you're talking about the city of Vancouver, but in fact, most of the conversation was spent on the downtown east side.
Yeah, and it's something that we tried to bring in a few more groups. And I think in our next conversation, we are going to spread the area around, recognizing the downtown east side has a significant amount of not only the nonprofit groups, the work going on, but a lot of the issues were exacerbated in the downtown east side through COVID. And I think that's a reason why it gets brought up a lot is how do we support the downtown east side? Recognizing that when we have people that deal with disability issues, they can only get enough funds to live in the downtown east side. Like we perpetuate the system, and that's an issue that we continue to do. So we can talk about why we have things in the downtown east side, but that's where we only have the services. So when we try to put temporary modular housing in Marpole, people say you can't put it there because there's no services to support the people you're putting in that place. So until we have support services across the city, which is something we need, and one of the things we did fund this year in the budget was having a place that supported sex workers up Kingsway, because before then we only had it in the downtown east side, right? Safe injections facilities. Look how hard it was to try to have them in other neighborhoods that are dealing with issue and having people die in their alleys. But people are needing to recognize it is happening in every neighborhood, and we need to have services to support them. But at this point, that's why the downtown east side was brought up the most.
Do you feel that there's a disconnect between the city of Vancouver and the downtown east side?
I think there's a disconnect between the city of Vancouver and 12th and Cambie. I think that it's been something that we're pulling together. I think there's a disconnect between the business community and City Hall. I think there's a disconnect between the elected officials and what's happening in Southland, what's happening in a lot of our neighborhoods. And I think that's something that we need to talk about is how do we get more people connected to City Hall? And Tonye and Kelly can I guess explain this even better. They've been involved in the last couple months with me, and they've recognized how different it is and how difficult and how the system isn't supporting the people we need it to, and how inaccessible our council meetings are, and how inaccessible the reports and what we do at City Hall is. And so it's accessible for a few, and until we can change how accessible City Hall is, I think you'll continue to see a disconnect.
So let me ask you a question about to Kelly and to Tonye about when the architecture for this roundtable was coming together. What was important to you?
Well, I'll say the reason I brought Tonye on was because they were the only person who came to my mind when Michael said he wanted to have a conversation about public safety. I'm like, well, it has to be Tonye, and not just because they're a fabulous host and wonderful and facilitator, but because they're holding the frame of this perspective that has not been showcased, that has not been attended to, and is loud and vocal and speaking the truth. And so what was important to me was having that perspective be the one that's framing the conversation, because for so long it's been the status quo, white supremacist, colonialist perspective that's been framing the conversation. And so when we're having this conversation about community safety, we need to ensure that the people who have been oppressed and marginalized the most are the ones leading the way. And everyone has a seat at this table. Everyone needs to be a part of this conversation, but it needs to be centered in a new way. And so that was what was my primary intention.
Tonye?
I feel like the reason that I was there was to, like Kelly said, ensure that this conversation was, first of all, being led with love and humor and kindness and grace and no negative energy. And I think that that's something that we desperately need to bring to these kind of conversations, is not to say that we need to make tragic things lighthearted, but just a sense of kindness needs to be in these conversations. So I hope that I succeeded in injecting that into what could have potentially been a powder keg of emotion. But it was really integral to me. The people that I invited to participate are real people who have lived experience of negative interactions with what we call public safety. And I'm really happy that the folks that I invited to participate or encouraged to ask questions were able to keep recentering the conversation and bringing it back to, I think somebody brought it up and they said, safety versus comfort. And really making sure that people stop thinking about their comfort and start thinking about the safety of the most marginalized in our community.
You're listening to the Conversation Lab, and we're speaking with Michael Weib, Tonye Aganaba, and Kelly Tatham. I've been part of the Downtown East Side community group of discussions with not-for-profits since March. And, having been participated in a lot of conversations, I think this was probably one of the best organized and one of the most meaningful conversations I've been part of. What did you learn from this conversation?
Yeah, I can go first. I think the biggest takeaway is the complexity of this conversation and how difficult it is to not frame it from your perspective or to not get defensive when we try to recognize that what we believe might be what we totally believe and feel safe in and feel comfortable with, but without actually having the different sides of the table and starting to learn a little bit more, we're not going to connect. And one of the things that I found most interesting for me was the conversations I had after, I think, right? So I had a lot of phone calls on the Friday, Charles Gauthier, right? The Vancouver police, others. So for me, it was more people's reaction to the conversation we had. And I think that was, Don, you just talked about how you felt for that conversation. Everyone reacted in a different way. And I think the biggest learning I had is how people reacted to hearing some of the things that were spoken. And I really appreciate the speakers for being able to speak as openly as they were. And other speakers that didn't have the opportunity to speak, talk about did they feel safe in that room or not. And one of the things that we really struggled with was trying to create a safe space to have a dialogue like this. You can never promise a safe space. And that's something we learned in the lead up to it, as well as opening up the chat and other things. So I think we really learned a lot about how we can try to create space to have this dialogue, which we need to have, and we need to have over and over again with more people and different people in the room, but how difficult that's going to be and how we can create a safe space. I think I learned a lot in that element.
So Kelly, how about you? What's your takeaway?
Yeah, I'll echo what Michael said about the discomfort and the messiness and the challenge. That's something I'm constantly remembering as we're working through dismantling and rebuilding all of the systems that we're living in and shifting to an equitable and humane society that is always going to be uncomfortable. But I think my biggest takeaway was that we really need to take a hard look at the language that we're using and how we're defining things like crime, because we have this whole myth and narrative around criminal activity and what crime is. But it's very odd to solve that, because we're talking about this. We've labeled crime as this terrible thing, when in many cases it's just people trying to survive capitalism, trying to get by in the day-to-day when resources have been withheld from them. And so to call that crime is very twisted for me. And I'm very interested in, as we continue these conversations, to dig into the language and to analyze it and to create new words if we need to, but to really parse through the mythology of the stories that we tell about what safety is, about what crime is, about what care is for each other in a community, and find new language to move forward more effectively and efficiently.
Nice. Tonye, I've always seen you on stage. I've never seen you behind the microphone organizing an event like this. And it's a real art. It's a real gift to be able to pull different ideas and different peoples together and open up a conversation. So I'm curious on a couple of levels. A, what was your takeaway? But what was it like for you being band leader and pulling all of these people together?
Kelly's the one who pulled all these people together in concert with Michael. I was just the band leader, as you said. I feel like it was a lot more stressful than I thought it would be. I'm very used to coordinating conversations with people that obviously we have different backgrounds, we have different beliefs, we have different political positions, but this one was the first one for me that was so highly charged. And so there was definitely a sense of, I had huge nerves around participating in this. But one of the biggest